Good morning to you all. Hope you're all well. As Liz was saying, I'm actually in Mexico at the moment. I'll be here for a couple of weeks on business. So we're going to have to do this slightly differently because the internet connection is not brilliant here. So Nick is going to be running the slides as well as marshalling at the same time. And there's a good chance I may suddenly vanish, not because the Mexican police have suddenly grabbed me, but that'll be because the internet connection has collapsed. But yes, so Liz, just before the meeting, you asked me what time it was here. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. It's still dark outside, but that doesn't matter. Right. Okay. So I believe with me today I've got Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hello, everybody.
And we have Liz. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
And we have Gareth. I do apologise to Gareth. I thought Gareth was not going to be here this week, but actually he's not going to be here next week. Hi, Gareth.
Hello. Right.
Okay. And I'm not certain because I can't see on the screen.
You do have a Naomi.
Sorry, Nick, could you repeat that?
Naomi's here.
Hi, Naomi. Yes. Hello, Naomi.
Hi, Malcolm and everyone.
Right. Okay. And do we have Kevin with us? Nick, can you see Kevin?
I've not seen a Kevin this morning.
Oh, right. Okay. I thought Kevin was going. Okay. Let's kick off Kevin a bit later. But that confuses matters. But let's carry on. We're not going to do.
Malcolm,
Yeah.
Megan's informed us that Kevin is still at Wembley.
Is he? Oh, right. Okay. Thank you, Megan. Is there something happening at Wembley?
Not today.
No, nothing.
Not today, no.
As soon as my team, the Ukraine, went out, I lost interest. Sorry, I had the Ukraine in the sweep. You know. Right. Okay. Well, let's move on. So we won't be doing Kevin's briefing either. So, and equally, Nick, if you could turn over the slides, please. Let's just remind people. So the NetSol Connect stuff that we're doing, telling everybody of the improvements and the changes that we're bringing to the BEX range of products. That's starting tomorrow. We've got two sessions tomorrow, and there's a third one I think we've also got available. Or if you can't do any of those dates and you want to come and see what we're doing, then just let Nick know, and you can register. The registration number has disappeared from the slides, but will be in your slide pack when I send those out. Okay, all right. So moving on to the next page. Right. Okay. So we won't be doing the stats this week either because I haven't managed to get hold of the stats. We will try and get things back in order. I promise you. Kevin's not here, so we can't do the business rate stuff because I don't know what he was going to tell us. So on that basis, let's have a look at the jobs market report. This was the report that was on the list to discuss last week, so we're going to talk about it this week. So back in May, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development and the recruitment firm ACO published a report that said that employers plan to hire at the fastest rate in 8 years. And this was largely being led by the reopening of hospitality, retail sectors as pandemic restrictions were relaxed. And if you remember last week, we talked about some of these issues last week. But they noted that the number of EU workers had been a sharp decline, and this was fueling the risk of labour shortages. So they reckon about 1.3 million workers have estimated to have left the UK since 2019. And I guess probably at that kind of number, some of them would have been on benefits. So we would have expected to have seen a drop in the caseload. Is that true, Laura? Have we seen a drop in the caseload?
I haven't seen a drop in the caseload, no, but that doesn't surprise me though when you look at the local economy, especially from an Oxford point of view, it is.
Yeah, and I assume that's the same for you, Naomi, isn't it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I could identify a trend within the caseload particularly, but I do know that locally there are issues with recruitment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide then, Nick. Nick, next slide. Right, so the Resolution Foundation, at the end of last month, they published a report as well. And they said that there is an early mild euphoria phase in the economic commentary cycle. So that sounds promising. And this is a change from the pessimism that we've seen in more recent years. Let's say for the labour market, the most discussed danger is that we have a tight labour market where it's hard to hire. So that kind of supports the previous report and what Naomi was saying as well. So they counted about 50 articles referencing labour shortages in the national media so far, with warnings that this may affect everything from meat production to construction to cannabis growing. So that's going to have some impact. Next slide, please, Nick. Yeah, you'll have to wait for your supplier there, Liz.
How did you know it was me chuckling?
Yes, so a tight labour market isn't necessarily a bad thing. So that's an important thing. That's correct in saying that, Gareth. Is that?
I'm no economist. It's always nice to have jobs available. It's always the problem, of course, of matching the kind of skills and experience against the job's need.
Yeah, and that's also what the report says as well. It says that the key features of the labour market during the pandemic, as opposed to usual recessions, are that the impacts are unequal sector by sector. So,
Ask a question about.
Go on, Laura.
What we're finding in Oxford is that people where maybe they were working as a barista or in the cafe, so less stable types of hours, for example, because they could have been on a 0 hours contract before that, have now gone and got themselves jobs in, say, for example, warehouses and distribution centres, because it's more stable income. And we're finding that we're struggling with recruitment in those types of positions where it's the 0 hours contract issue. And I didn't know if the report was referring to that.
Yeah, I think the report is quite detailed, but I don't think it does particularly refer to that area. But you would, I guess, probably expect that to be the case. Again, Gareth, I know that does sound like an economics question, but I guess that's probably true, isn't it?
I think, particularly given people's experiences over the past year, the more confidence and security they've got, the more likely they are to choose that option.
Yeah. Liz, they say that the labour market room readers should expect a bumpy ride. Do you think that would be true also for local authority benefit managers in trying to work out what the caseload is going to be?
Well, yes, I suppose so. I think one of this is everything seems to change every 5 minutes. I mean, at one point I read that, of course, mostly affected are the younger end of the employment market. Young people have been more affected. And then you read that older people have been, particularly women, have been more affected by employment during the pandemic. And I just wonder what difference the end of furlough will make to some of these, shall we say, lower end jobs. I agree completely with Laura that people who have been lucky enough to move into more stable employment are going to stay there, obviously. But there are these people who are coming back into the employment market who have obviously now lost their job because of the end or the reduction in furlough. So who knows what difference any of it's going to make?
Yeah, and the report kind of also comes into that. They said that there needs to be more focus on levels rather than the rates of change, because actually the rates of change are too confusing at the moment.
Well, if that's what that means, I agree with that.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's not. It's just, as Gareth says, I'm not an economist either, so I don't, if that's what that means, then I agree with it.
Yes, and it's saying, yes, I mean, fundamentally it's saying that you can't draw these general kind of conclusions about the labour market from specific sectors.
No, and of course we're all doing that though, aren't we?
Yes,
I've just done it.
Yes, and I mean that is quite important for working out what our caseloads are going to be. So those kind of impact assessments that we've kind of come to rely on during, before the pandemic, largely completely go out of the window, because actually all of those levels and rates of change come a bit dog-eared, really. But I guess that's probably Naomi. I mean, it must be difficult at the moment to work out what caseloads are going to be like in the next few months once restrictions have been lifted.
I have been dusting off my rooms, but also, crystal balls come down from the attic to try and get any sort of understanding is an absolute nightmare. And it's not just the caseload, that there's also the ancillary work that many Revs and Bens teams have been dragged into over the last 15 months or so. Universal credit migration impacting our caseload has been so difficult to predict. When it first started, it was quite landslide. Then it tailed off during the pandemic when we had a huge number of the everyone in caseload cohort. It shot up. And yes, it is decreasing, but not massively at the moment. So really trying to predict the next 2 months is difficult, let alone what we're, obviously having to try and do 6, 12, 18, 24 months. Very difficult.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, Gareth, there's an added dimension to this, which we discussed over the last couple of weeks, which is the rising cost of housing and increased debt. That kind of overlays everything at the same time, does it not?
I think rather than overlay, it goes side by side, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the big issue from kind of the benefit side in general around what's going to happen over the next month or so, or 2 months at least, is going to be the issue around the ending of furlough and the ending of the £20 add-on for the kind of the UC and working tax credit. Those two combined are going to create kind of enormous pressures on people. And the trouble with the kind of the ending of those is that they get complicated by things like the overall benefits cap, which has hit some people, so they haven't seen the benefit of the £20 uplift. And of course, the way that the benefit cap works with legacy benefits, that the HB people that have been affected by the cap have been the ones who really haven't, in the main, had the £20 uplift because the legacy benefits for non-workers just haven't been increased.
And does this all kind of fit in as well with the government's desire to try and drive people back into work as soon as they can get back to that agenda?
I think that's certainly a Treasury desire, isn't it? And you can understand why. But you can try and drive people to work, but there have to be jobs there for them that they're capable of doing.
Yeah, and do you think, I mean, I guess probably Laura, I mean, would you think that the press in its usual capacity won't see that difference between jobs that are available for people that people can do and jobs that are available that actually require specialist skills?
I have to say, Malcolm, I think you can definitely tell we've got a change in a health minister. Now we're talking about, we've got to go back to work and go back to out of shutdown for people's mental health and well-being. I think that's a very clear steer now from the government that they want to no longer do shutdown. They want to re-establish the economy. Now, whether that means from a mental health point of view, people have got meaningful jobs, now that's a completely different conversation, because I think now we've got to the situation where with furlough and with the different support from the government, such as the self-employed grants, all coming to an end in September, I think it's going to try and create, in effect, a false economy now. There's going to be a massive driver for the next 2 to 3 months to see if we can stimulate it to offset what I think is the cliff face on the 1st of October. Because as soon as that government support stops, there's going to be many businesses, which I think pre-COVID were struggling, now kind of functioning just on the government support, that will now go into bankruptcy and liquidation from October onwards.
Yeah. Following up on one thing that Malcolm said, which I think has been really interesting, and I don't think it's been mentioned here before, is the disappearance of the kind of the tabloid press and the reality TV's benefit scroungers campaign over the last year. We've seen a complete absence of all of those kind of campaigns about people sitting on their John Lewis sofas, eating a foie gras, drinking champagne and watching giant flat screen TVs in luxury. And fairly obviously that's because there are 4 or 5 million more people who are on benefit than ever expected to be now. And a lot of them have realised that benefits life isn't luxurious. And I wonder whether the government's kind of campaigns might be affected by missing that kind of support.
I agree, Gareth. I think the can't pay and will take it away approach, we're showing people being subject to sheriffs and high court enforcement processes. I think that's going to make a difference, because there's a hell of a lot more people now affected by that. And the perception that, like you say, sitting on a John Lewis sofa eating caviar is actually now affecting everybody now. Everyone's got credit card debts. Everybody's got different way of whether they've been functioning through Amazon and all the rest of it, just to try and keep themselves entertained during 15 months of being trapped in a house.
And the other thing, oh, sorry, Mark, I can carry on.
I was going to say, yeah, that is true. And of course, actually, I mean, quite a lot of the groups that are now having to claim are the readers of those very same publications. Oh, go on, Gareth.
Not quite sure who's sending the code. No, I think it's just really been a huge turnaround, and you've seen that in the opinion surveys, the polls as well, where going back 18 months or so, it was benefits are too generous and too easy to claim, and now that's switched around, and all the surveys are saying that people think benefits aren't generous enough, particularly for vulnerable people, and should be made easier to claim.
And do you think that that's going to actually have an effect on the government's narrative of levelling up?
I think it's probably going to have a bit of an effect on their unwillingness or less willingness to level down.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that point. Yeah. If only we had some kind of benefit that only focused on supporting people's rents, they might find that useful. But anyway, let's have the next slide.
Yeah.
So let's just cover off the findings from this report. So this report says there's good news and basically not so good news. So the good news is that vacancies are on the rise. And also there was other good news, which they say that 80% of those that were on the first tranche of furlough have now returned to work. I'm not certain, have we noticed this so much? Naomi, have you seen this in your caseload?
Not particularly, no. No.
And that's the same, I assume, for you as well, Laura.
Yeah, no, I haven't either.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that 80% of those that came in on the second wave of furlough have returned to work. They're going to be affected more by what happens next. Unemployment down to 4.7%, which was predicted to be much higher. But again, Gareth, part of what I don't really get much of a feel for is the return to these sort of 0-hour contracts, self-employed work. I mean, self-employed are largely left out of these figures, aren't they?
Yeah, they don't tend to appear in the kind of labour market stats in the same, just not in the same way. The worry there, of course, is that when the minimum income floor gets reintroduced for people, because that's been suspended again until September, then you're going to find, again, I think, a really big tranche of people whose self-employment is just not sustainable at that level, because it takes time, if you've been closed down for 15 months, to re-establish yourself and to get back up to the kind of level of work that you're doing before. If part of what you have to be doing is kind of remarketing your services, if you like, because the demand for what you supplied has gone elsewhere and has gone online and has been met in different sorts of ways, or just doesn't exist anymore, because if you're a shoe shine worker in the City of London, you're going to see a lot less pairs of shoes going past you than you had before the lockdown.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, yes, absolutely. There is the other thing that they mentioned, which is that earnings have improved. Now, I think from the previous reports that we went through, earnings have improved, but they've not kind of improved for everyone. Am I right in saying that? Liz, can you remember?
No, I can't, Malcolm, frankly.
Yes, I think fundamentally, if you remained in work and you were in work, then earnings have improved. But largely speaking, only if you were on some of the higher incomes. But if you're on the lower incomes, earnings have not improved at all.
Well, so that would follow the normal trend.
It does, yes. Yeah. And surprisingly, I mean, much of what we've spoken about today is the pandemic hasn't really offered us much in the way of normal trends to which we can follow. The rule books have generally just been thrown straight into the bins. But that kind of thing, that kind of economic drivers, they have not changed, and the pandemic wouldn't particularly change that. Now, I will say, when you look at, I know I'm going back a bit, and I may be the only person who's old enough to remember this, but when the Villain system stopped, and we saw the sort of the rise in what was more similar to the jobs market that we see now. So we're going back to the time of the Great Plagues. That was because of the Great Plagues. They did create a tight market and so you had that shift from indentured workers to workers being able to ask for a wage, and that's when we see those kind of changes.
Yeah, that's interesting. The Black Death, though, if you actually look at it quite closely, and it's kind of one of the areas I've been reading on recently. Of course, it wasn't just that you had a reduction in the labour force that was available.
Yeah.
You also had a reduction in the amount of land that was being used. So you had a kind of a smaller industry and an even smaller labour force.
Yes, and a smaller number of purchases as well.
Yeah.
I mean that's not happened here, largely because even though the numbers of deaths, we instinctively feel are high, they haven't actually been as high as you would expect during a pandemic of this kind of level. It sounds a bit cynical, but it's just how it is, I guess. So the not so good news is that whilst the labour market appears to be tight, it's really far from being tight. And also the other important thing is that the total hours worked are down by 5%. So that's quite important. I mean, that's quite important to the economy, but that will also impact on our caseloads as well, because people will be working 5% less, or that will be represented within the caseload of that 5%. So, I mean, it won't be everybody, but some people, their hours will be down significantly more than 5%.
I think you have to differentiate there, don't you, between people who are, if you like, salaried, and they might work less, but they're still being paid the same, and those people who are being hourly paid.
Yes, I mean that's absolutely correct. I can see some comments are coming in, but unfortunately I can't read them from here, so I apologise for that. So let's just finish off these last two, and then I'll ask Nick if there's anything in the comments there that is worth adding to or should be added to this discussion. The equivalent at the moment, because of that total hours worked being dropped down to 5%, that is the equivalent of 2 million people not working. So that has sort of a wide range of impacts. Gareth, you were going to say something?
No, I wasn't. Other than to say that does depend. That seems to be assuming that they're all hourly paid.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. This was just an estimate. Laura, do you want to add something?
No, that's fine. I was just having a bit of a chuckle. Sorry.
And we spoke about the self-employed. 10% of the self-employed are still not working. Liz, I see that Lynn has raised her hand. Do you want to invite Lynn in to comment?
Yeah, Malcolm, she's open now.
Hi there, Malcolm. Hi there, everyone. Hi. I was just, I've actually put this on the chat, but I was just thinking about the unemployment figures. Obviously, 4.7 is very low compared to what was expected. But then I think when furlough ends completely, we'll see that rise quite sharply, because I'm just thinking of people that are no longer be going into offices every day. And I mean, where I worked in London, and there were 4 pret-a-manger's within 2-minute walk. Now I can't see them all surviving if not so many people return to offices in that way, really. So I can see a lot of these figures from this report being drastically changed within the next couple of months.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, you touched on something else. I mean, there was the report as well, wasn't there? That Gap are closing all of their stores and just converting to online trading. So we've got all of that is sort of lurking around as well, because I assume that not all Gap workers will migrate to the online trading. I kind of assume that Gap's online trading has been going for some time, so it's probably not going to absorb that many of those people that are working in the shops. Do you think, Lynn, that that's going to have additional impacts? I mean, it's part of the hidden stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, you know, that with this particular findings, apologies, that I'm not sure what it's been based on, because I think the local feel is that there's a lot of people not working their full capacity. Obviously, with the furlough, they're still employed, but actually, will they be in a couple of months? You know, I just think that maybe I'm being a bit glass half empty at the moment, which is very unlike me, as those of you who know me will say. But I do think this is potentially a much bigger problem for the economy and for the country.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic has just accelerated something which, in a sense, is inevitable and huge. Because if you think about what shops are, most of them are actually just a part of a distribution chain from a producer to a consumer.
Yes.
And it always has been this, you know, the producer goes to kind of, you know, a distributor, the distributor sends things around, you know, this kind of hub and spoke thing to different places around the country, and the shops distribute them to consumers. Well, you know, we've seen from the online stuff that there is an alternative way of doing it. And my feeling is that shops are a really, really expensive way of operating distribution. And they're failing in competition. I mean, that doesn't apply to things, you know, which are locally produced and sort of individual crafts and arts and so forth. But in the main, it's just something which is, you know, a big, not as an economist, but a big economic shift in the way in which goods are distributed.
I totally agree, Gareth. I really do. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of town centres will become ghost towns.
Yes, let me just pick on that.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go on, Liz. Yeah.
I mean, actually, I think this discussion is really interesting because, I mean, these figures are quite crude measurements of what's happening.
Okay.
I mean, there is so much social shift that you can't, it's so difficult to work out what is going to happen. And I'm not really talking in terms of benefit, I'm talking in terms of everything. I mean, interestingly enough, working from home isn't overlaid on this. It's going to have a huge effect on, I mean, you know, even people, the number of hours that they need to work. You know, we know that people are saving money because, and putting it to good use by depositing it somewhere, because they don't have to pay 600 quid to get to work, which means essentially that you might turn around and say, well, actually, you know, I could manage working 4 days a week. And it just, the whole social shift is so great that it's fascinating, really. And what do we do with our town centres? What do we do?
Yes, you're absolutely.
Will we have a return to, I don't know, a more, I don't know, so I'll put this in a one way, a more agricultural way of looking at things, you know, particularly if you live, as I do, in a market town. So what about the returns of market? What about all the things that we can sell locally and produce locally? It's fascinating.
So these are really good points you're raising, this, and I totally agree.
I'll shut up now because it's 12:34.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to be coming to this. I just really want to join up, actually, one thing. You know, the stuff that you've just said, Liz, to what Gareth has said, is a lot of this stuff was going to be happening inevitably. And I think, you know, working from home was on the increase. The move to cashless banking was on the increase. The closures of shops and the move to online shopping was on the increase. And Gareth is quite right. The pandemic has accelerated all of that at a speed that we weren't expecting. I mean, probably the one thing it does suggest is that if faced with a decision about building HS2 today, the government probably come to a different conclusion, which I think is probably quite interesting. But we will close off at this point. Nick, can we just move through the last few stages just to remind me what I need to say? We'll do second homes next week because that's going to pick up on quite a lot of the stuff. No, we're not going to second homes now, Nick. But we'll look at second homes next week. That kind of picks up on all the stuff that Liz has been talking about, and we'll carry on the conversation for
The other
next
thing
week.
that's quite interesting in relation to that, if you've got anything, is the sort of building strategies. You know, as I live in a town that is, and I've never worked in it, but as I live in a town that's quite close to London, the housing strategy here and the building strategy and providing homes has majored in on people who might travel, and they're not going to anymore.
Yeah, okay, listen, we'll talk about that next week. When we
just
do
getting my,
homes,
I'll stop it now.
Otherwise, you're just getting into the second home stuff. Right, okay, so if we click to the end, so I'll distribute the slides as I've been doing the last week. Also to remind you, if you want to catch up on the previous sessions, they are still on the stage, but I will be closing the stage down soon. But at the moment, you can get them also on YouTube. So we'll be migrating stuff over to YouTube. But the last, I think, 3 weeks plus this week will all be on YouTube now. Okay, on that basis, can I thank my panel? Can I thank Gareth? I'm sorry I wrote you out this week.
No, you're welcome. Our apologies for next week, and you're probably quite glad that I won't be around for the second homes discussion.
Oh, no, I was hoping, because we mentioned Wales.
Yes.
Right, can I thank Nick for controlling everything and keeping an eye on everyone? Excellent marshalling. Can I thank Naomi? Thank you very much, Naomi.
Thank you, everyone.
And also Laura as well.
Thank you, everyone.
And Liz, of course. Thank you very much. And yes, and can I thank, I'm getting old. Can I thank you all for your participation? Anyway, I'll see you all next week. I'll be in Mexico still, and have a good week.
You too,
Thank
Mel.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
You
Bye.
too.
Bye.
Bye.